How to live with inflation. Inflation is defined as a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy. In other words, it's when the cost of living goes up. The effects of inflation can be felt by everyone, as it causes the purchasing power of our money to decrease. So how do we live with inflation? By making adjustments to our budget, investing in assets that hold their value, and considering relocating to a cheaper area. We can also protect ourselves from inflation by diversifying our investments, purchasing inflation-protected securities, and having an emergency fund. In this blog post, we'll explore all of these topics in more detail so that you can learn how to live with inflation and protect yourself from its effects. The definition of inflation. Inflation is defined as the sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. In other words, inflation reflects a decrease in the purchasing power of money, a rise in prices relative to a given amount of money. The main effects of inflation are: Number 1, a reduction in the real value of money and other monetary items. Money loses its purchasing power and becomes relatively more expensive to hold. This is because, as prices rise, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. For example, if prices rise by 10%, then a $100 bill can only buy the same amount of goods that it could previously purchase for $90. Number 2, an increase in the cost of living. As prices rise, consumers need more money to maintain their standard of living. This is often referred to as cost-push inflation. For example, if housing costs increase by 5%, then consumers will need an additional 5% income just to keep up with their previous standard of living. Number 3, a redistribution of income and wealth. Inflation can redistribute income from those on fixed incomes, for example, retirees, to those whose incomes grow with prices, for example, debtors. It can also redistribute wealth from those who hold cash and other assets denominated in fixed amounts of currency, for example, savings accounts, to those who hold assets whose values are linked to changes in prices, for example, stockholders. How to live with inflation. If you're on a fixed income, or your income doesn't keep up with inflation, it's important to adjust your budget. There are a few ways to do this. Cut back on discretionary spending. This is the easier option, and it doesn't require making any major changes to your lifestyle. Just trim the fat from your budget and cut out unnecessary expenses. Earn more money. If you can find ways to increase your income, you'll be in a better position to cope with inflation. This might involve getting a higher paying job, starting a side hustle, or investing in assets that generate passive income. Reduce your expenses. This is the harder option, but it can be more effective in the long run. If you can reduce your cost of living, you'll need less money to maintain your standard of living. This might involve downsizing your home, moving to a cheaper area, or making other lifestyle changes. Invest in assets that hold their value. One way to protect yourself from inflation is to invest in assets that hold their value over time. These include things like precious metals, gold and silver, real estate, and collectibles, art, antiques, etc. While there's no guarantee that these assets will appreciate at the same rate as inflation, they tend to do better than most other investments during periods of high inflation. Consider relocating to a cheaper area. If inflation is eating into your budget and you can't seem to make ends meet, it might be time to consider relocating to a cheaper area. This could mean moving to a less expensive city or country, or even just finding a cheaper neighborhood within your current city/town/village/ etc. Of course, this is a major decision and it's not right for everyone. But if you're struggling to keep up with inflation, it might be worth considering. How to protect yourself from inflation. A good way to protect yourself from inflation is to diversify your investments. This means investing in a variety of assets, including stocks, bonds, and real estate. By diversifying your investment portfolio, you can minimize the risk of losing money if one asset class goes down in value. Purchase inflation-protected securities. Another way to protect yourself from inflation is to purchase inflation-protected securities, such as Treasury Inflation-Protected Securities, TIPS. TIPS are government bonds that offer protection against inflation by providing a higher interest rate when the rate of inflation is high. Have an emergency fund. Another way to protect yourself from the effects of inflation is to have an emergency fund that you can tap into if needed. This will help you cover unexpected expenses if your income doesn't keep up with the rising cost of living. Conclusion. Inflation can be a difficult thing to live with, but there are ways to make it work for you. By adjusting your budget, investing in assets that hold their value, and considering relocating to a cheaper area, you can make inflation work for you. You can also protect yourself from inflation by diversifying your investments, purchasing inflation-protected securities, and having an emergency fund. No matter what approach you take to dealing with inflation, remember to stay mindful of your finances and make sure you have a plan in place.